Hello, guys and gals, and this is let me make sure that part 22 of our reading of Pandora's Genes. This is a book by Kathryn Lance, and we are going to go over the copyright information. But first, um, this is the first book of a trilogy. The second book being Pandora's Children, and the third being Pandora's Promise. And if you would like a copy of that book yourself, then most of the big book retailers will probably have a copy of it. I think it's been reprinted several times. And it is truly a book that is ahead of its time. Anyways, we have the copyright information here. It's copyright 1985, all rights reserved, but I have the author's written permission to read this book on my YouTube channel. Now, so yeah, there's that. And much gratitude to Kathryn Lance for allowing me this privilege. Anyways, in the last part, Billy tried to teach Zach the tenets of the traitor faith, and Yosh was put to death, and Jonah became the new priestess. So we're going to see what happened. Zach was trying to find a way to escape, and we don't know if he's going to find a way out or not. I would assume so, but it's going to be interesting. We don't have very far to go, actually. We still have quite a few pages, but let's get this on the way. Okay, we got to here where it says Zach nodded, or on page 231. Zach nodded. You must have wondered why you have not been killed. We have no need for male prisoners. The reason you have been spared is that Yosh loved you. He told me more than once that in a different world you would have been his closest friend. I always felt that too, said Zach. He cared for you too much to let you die a scientist. He knew that you could not help your background, although there are some traitors, I'm afraid, a growing number, who feel the best way to convert a scientist is to kill him. Still, Yosh wanted to cleanse your soul, and that is why he had you brought here. That was good of him, said Zach, oddly moved. Like so many things about the traitors, this too made a kind of cockeyed sense, and he knew that it had been meant in a loving spirit. As his widow, I have some power. Your young preacher has come to me and asked me to persuade the bishops to let you introduce your song at the memorial service for Yosh. He feels that it would not break the spirit of Yosh's command to let you out, just the once under guard, and to return you immediately. I have to agree that it seems right. Before I make a final decision, let me hear the song. Feeling self-conscious and not a little dishonest, Zach still stood and sang. When he had finished, Jonah's eyes were shining with tears. It brings him back, she whispered. Thank you. 2 days later, Billy came rushing into the corridor again, stuttering in excitement. On the special holy day set aside in Yosh's memory 1 week from now, Zach would sing his remarkable song in the trader's high services. Zach's joy at the news was not faked. This was then, finally, his chance to escape, his only chance. If he were to fail in this attempt, he knew there would never be another. 5. After he had finished his breakfast, there was nothing for Zach to do but wait. By late morning, the sound of chanting began in the park outside. He went to the window and saw what appeared to be many dozens of traitor men, women, and children gathering around the sheltered altar. In another hour or two, he would be gone from here or dead. In either case, he would be a free man for the first time in 5 years. Once it had been decided that he would sing in the memorial service, Zach had made no further plans. He had not been outdoors in years, and in any case was familiar only with the narrow slice of the town he could see from his window. He would use his wits once he was out and seize whatever opportunities arose. Oh, sorry. This should be back on this. He had thought that he might be given new clothes to replace his filthy rags in honor of Yash, but the traders valued neatness no more than cleanliness. The chanting grew louder, and Zach began to pace, not for exercise, but to relieve his tension. He was conscious that once again he was about to betray a trust. He had lied to Billy, whom he genuinely liked, and was perhaps even endangering him. He had lied to Jonah, who had saved his life, and he had written a song that was a tissue of lies. There was truth in the song too, and that was why it was so successful. But all the same, it was a betrayal to Yash, who had spared his life out of love. Yet it must be done. The future of mankind might depend on his escaping and taking what he knew of the traitors back to the principal. Once again, expediency won, the choosing of one commitment over another. He tried to look at it as a traitor would. As a scientist, his mission was to save humanity, and before anything in the end was justified, he knew it was true, and he also knew it was wrong. Billy and the first bishop came for him just at noon. They stood by as three guards checked Zach for hidden weapons and securely bound his hands in front of him. Billy grinned nervously, stood by, shifting his weight from one foot to another. Zach was scarcely aware of the others. He was looking at every detail of the cell. He would never see it again. He had resolved that if he failed in his attempt to escape, he would not return here alive. The escape proved far easier than he expected. This was partly because of the beauty of the song itself. As Billy had earlier told the bishop, this was divinely inspired. He couldn't have written it if he weren't sincere. And evidently everyone else believed that Zach was now a true traitor. Everyone, even the bishops, apparently hadn't seriously considered that he might try to escape. His stirring tribute to Yash seemed clear proof that Zach would follow Yash's commands as scrupulously as any traitor. For all the traitors, the will of Yash was everything. Zach was sure that within another generation he would be elevated to the status of a god. Traitor women and children had attached hundreds of summer flowers to the three sides of the roof of the shelter above the altar. Zach stumbled as the guards led him across the park. The beauty of the flowers, the grass, and the soft summer air had taken the strength from him. Scores of congregants, some of whom, according to Billy, had traveled hundreds of miles to be here, sat patiently on the grass, chanting and waiting for the service to begin. Most of them stared at Zach in frank curiosity. Billy had told him that the story of his song had spread quickly, making him famous throughout the traitor empire. Zach sat on a low wooden bench with the first bishop and Billy on either side of him, the guards standing at the back. They were armed with knives and swords, but seemed as awed by the occasion as everyone else. The service seemed to take hours, though in truth it probably lasted little longer than the noontime and evening services Zach had often heard from his cell. There were many familiar chants and songs, and the burning for this special occasion of 3 books. Finally, Jonah stood and delivered a tribute to Yash. She was dressed in a long blue hooded robe with a pale veil partially covering her face. Zach had to admit that she looked almost beautiful as she spoke of her love for Yash and his love for his people. When she had finished, the first bishop spoke for a few minutes, retelling the story of Yash's revelation and explaining how he had captured and converted Zach, a scientist who had been one of the principal's own men. Then it was Zach's turn. The silence became total when Zach stood. He stumbled as he got up and put out his arms, then almost fell. Jonah motioned to the guards, and they cut his bonds. Zach hid his relief. It would be easier this way. He did not have to fake the trembling of his knees as he mounted the altar. He looked out at at the gathering congregation, opened his mouth, and sang. When he had finished, he could see tears on the faces of those sitting closest to him, including his guards. The first bishop thanked him and signaled and into the services. Then traders began to crowd around the altar. Men and women both came to Zach, wanting to touch him and tell him how much the song had moved him. The guard stood back while the bishop and Billy looked on proud. Jonah even came to him and hugged him quickly. Her eyes went wet with tears. After the service, a feast had been planned. Zach had assumed he was to be returned to the prison directly after the ceremony, but instead he stayed, continuing to talk to traders and eating the morsels of food they brought him. After perhaps an hour of this, Zach told the guards that he needed to relieve himself. They agreed readily, and the youngest of the three escorted Zach to the thick brush of the forest alongside the park. Zach hoped that the town was no bigger than the few buildings he could see. The guard apologized, embarrassed. "I hope you understand that I must stay here. It's orders." "Of course," said Zach politely. The young man looked away while Zach fumbled with his trousers so he didn't see the blow aimed at the back of his neck, which Zach hoped had not killed him. Zach took the knife and sword, then simply walked away. He was certain he would not be missed for several minutes. The town extended no further than the length of the park, and in no time Zach was in deep forest. He did not know for certain where he was, only that he was somewhere in the uncharted western wilderness. It was late summer, and there would be a good bit of daylight yet for him to put as much distance as possible between himself and the traders. He could imagine the consternation when his deception had been discovered. Billy, he knew, would be heartbroken. Zach looked at the sun, estimating the time of day and the direction, then began to trot east. 6. After several weeks of slow traveling, constantly on the lookout for trader patrols, Zach at last reached the western hills of the south. In the south of the district, he planned to go first to the garden to see the mistress if she still lived, and to find out if he could, what had become of Evie. He tried not to have any expectations, aware that things might have changed a great deal in the time he had been in prison, since what he found was a greater shock than he was prepared for. Although he had tried to clean himself as soon as he was well away from the trader's settlement, the grime was too deeply embedded to come off with anything but repeated applications of soap and hot water. The parasites and stench would require a more civilized, or at least leisurely, approach. What with the dirt, his unkempt hair and beard, and the rags he was wearing, the men he now living in the garden took him for a trader. Zach realized with relief that the principal must have moved the women to the peninsula for protection, but the guards at the gate arrested him immediately and refused to answer any of his questions. He had hoped to find one of the principal's generals in charge, or someone else who would recognize him, but there was no one here that he had ever seen before. He was questioned roughly several times, first by the guards, then their superiors, and finally by the commandant. A ruddy, big-boned man who looked at him with open suspicion as Zach began patiently to tell his story again. "I am the principal's brother," he said. "I have important information for the principal. Please help me to get to the capital." He was standing in the old woman's cabin, now the commandant's office, while the guards who had arrested him flanked him, their weapons ready. Although nothing of the old woman's remained, he remembered it as if he could see them. Each table and chair, the row of scientific equipment, and the dozens of shelves of books. The crude furniture and military equipment was jarringly out of place, as were the men, yet even his captors' distrustfulness couldn't stop him from feeling somehow at home. The commandant was picking his teeth and looking bored. "The principal's brother has been dead for years," he said. He has no other." "I was captured by the traders," Zach said, with growing exasperation. "I've been in prison for 5 years. Traitors don't take male prisoners, said the commandant. Besides, if you're the principal's brother, where's your seal ring? I lost it, Zack said. Aware how feeble his answer was, he spoke again quickly. If I were really a traitor, would I come to you this openly? Who knows what a traitor would do? He's a filthy traitor spy, said the commandant's aide. I say let's hang him right now. The commandant sighed. Don't be too quick, Jared. Everyone knows how the principal felt about his brother. Suppose what he says is somehow true. The younger man snorted. Look at him. If that's the principal's brother, I'm my own sister. It was clear to Zack that the commandant didn't believe him any more than the soldier did, but the man seemed shrewd enough to realize that if by some chance the story were true, it would be prudent to let Zack reach the principal. After several more days of verbal sparring, the commandant sent Zack along with a weekly courier to the capital. He was tied securely to an aging mount and carefully watched by two young soldiers, both of whom treated him with contempt, referring to him as filthy traitor. Despite the circumstances of the journey, Zack's excitement grew as he approached familiar land. The road to the capital was far better maintained now than it had been in the past. Clearly, the principal had made changes, probably out of the necessity to improve communications with his new outpost in the west. Okay. He had almost forgotten that he was probably riding to his death, nor did he think much about the information he would deliver to the principal. One thing only filled his mind, making him feel like a child again. He was going home. As they approached the capital, Zack asked his guards for permission to bathe in the river using soap. He couldn't help but think of Will's fastidiousness. A traitor? Wash? Why don't you just ask us to cut you loose and close our eyes while you run away? You needn't untie me, said Zack. Only help me to get some of the worst of it off. The guard spat in disgust. The guard spat in disgust. Sitting here is the closest I've ever wanted to get to a filthy traitor, he said roughly. He shoved Zack to the ground. Ask the principal for a bath if he's such a good friend of yours. Maybe we ought to clean him up, said the other guard. Probably be the worst thing you could do to a traitor. With that, they both laughed loudly and passed another pipe of new smoke. In the end, it was just that way, filthy, his hair matted and full of parasites, half-starved and in rags, his hands fettered in front of his legs, his hands fettered in front, his legs shackled together, and Zack was brought to the house of the principal. As he and the couriers rode along the broad avenue, ignoring the taunts of those who had spotted a prisoner, all that he could think of was that he was here. The capital was noisier and brighter and far, far more beautiful than he had remembered it. His guards told him the same story. The guards told the same story at each of the security posts, beginning at the Iron Gate. This crazy traitor claims that he is the principal's brother. The commandant thought the principal might want to question him. At last, he was taken to the office with rounded walls where the principal conducted his public business. Zack saw very few familiar faces along the way. Undoubtedly, all the generals were busy. From the improved condition of the roads and the conversation of his guards, he gathered that the principal was greatly expanding his army. In any case, he was doubtful of any of his old friends would recognize him now. Apart from the filth, Zack was sure he might appear aged by 20 more years than the 5 which in reality had passed. Now, waiting in the wood-paneled hall, held against the wall by the museum lance of the principal's private guard, a man Zack had never seen before, he heard the courier speaking to the principal about the crazy traitor, and then a bellow, "All right, you come this far, bring him in." At the sound of the voice, Zack felt as if a large hand had suddenly taken his body and were squeezing him in half. He was dragged into the familiar room. The principal, standing behind the polished desk, his back to the light, his dark eyebrows pulled together in concentration as he peered into the book in his hand. Zach thought he saw gray hairs along the dark curls. Then the principal's face seemed to dissolve as everything that had happened in the 5 years welled up and overflowed. Zach began to shake with sobs just as the guard pushed him into the center of the room. "Here he is, sir." The principal looked up preoccupied and annoyed. "Well," he said, "I'm a busy man. Don't stand there blubbering. Tell your..." And then he stopped and stared. The small amount of color in the pale face drained away, and he leaned on the desk for support and continued to gaze at Zach. He mouthed the name Zach, but made no sound. "Are you all right, sir?" asked the guard, sounding frightened. The principal didn't move from where he was, still leaning against the desk. He quietly said, "Unbind this man immediately." Even more frightened, the courier and guard began fumbling with the bonds, trying to untie knots that trembled with their own and Zach's shaking. "Cut them, for the Dina's sake." Before the man could respond, the principal himself strode across the room and cut through the ropes with his own knife. "All of you, get out of here," he cried, his face less than 2 inches from that of his private guard. "Tell my secretary to bring in food and drink. That's all." The men were very glad to go. Zach felt the principal's strong arms around him as he lifted his own arms, weak from having been tied, and embraced his brother, still unable to speak. The principal recovered first. He brushed his hand across his face, and in a voice still shaky, said, "You look terrible." He led Zach to the couch and helped him to sit. Zach's attack of weeping had ended. He wiped his eyes and tried to catch his breath. The principal stepped back and looked at him, his face full of joy and amazement. There was a knock on the door, and Robin came in with a large tray. Let me see. Okay. "We'll begin to speak immediately. No more visitors. No interruptions. I don't care what happens. I don't care if the lord of the traders comes into the city to surrender. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," said Robin uncertainly. He looked curiously at Zach, recoiling at the filth. Then his face changed. "Great Dinas," he said. "Yes," said the principal. "Zach has returned to us from the dead. But how?" "I don't know. I don't care. We'll find out sooner or later, but all that matters is that he is back." Okay. Back. "Yes, sir. Yes, sir. This is wonderful news. Welcome home, Zach." Impulsively, the old man went to Zach, took his hand, and dropped it uncertainly and backed off. Zach smiled. "Thank you, Robin," he started to say, but he couldn't find his voice. The principal handed him a cup of warm brew. "Here, this will help you get a hold on yourself." Zach eagerly accepted. Wait a minute. Yeah. Zach eagerly accepted. Sorry, I lost my place. He eagerly accepted it. It had been a very long time since he had tasted brew, and it was even better than he remembered. He had took the liquid in short gulps, warming his throat and his stomach, and a feeling of peace began to spread through his body. At last he had his breath. He looked up at the principal, who was still standing before him, pacing from foot to foot in the quick, nervous way he had, his face open with joy. "I can't believe it's you," the principal said. "I look at you and I know you, and I don't believe you're here." Zach wanted to speak, but he had so much to say he didn't know where to begin. "You must eat," said the principal. He brought the tray to the couch and placed it beside Zach. There were sausages and bread and cheese, and Zach looked at the array hungrily. The principal broke off a piece of sweet bread, and Zach ate it in one bite, then washed it down with 2 large gulps of brew. He began to chew on a sausage. The rich taste seemed to explode in his mouth. "I'll have a bath made up and call in the barbers," said the principal. "Or you can rest. I know you've been through a lot. I can't imagine what. Would you like to rest now?" Zach shook his head. The two men continued to eat and drink for some time, and still Zach found it difficult to begin talking. After he had eaten his fill for the first time in memory, and washing down the last of the sausage with brew, Zach at last said, "I have been a prisoner of the traitors for all these years." "I guessed as much," said the principal. "All this time I thought you were dead. My men found the place where you were attacked and brought me your things. Later we discovered your seal ring from the remains of a skeleton. The man was so large we assumed it was you." Um, um, oh, lost my place. Sorry about that. Let's see. Zach's stomach turned over. The sausages had been far richer than the food he was used to, and for a moment he thought he would be sick. The dead man, whoever he was, could have gotten the seal ring only from one person, Evie. She would not have given it up willingly, and that meant, "Are you all right?" The principal touched Zach's shoulder. His face was close and worried. We're going to stop that here. We're going to find out more later. We made it to page 241. That's nice. So, anyways, we have been reading from Pandora's Genes. It is a book by Kathryn Lance, and it is part of a trilogy, the first book of a trilogy, actually, with the second book being Pandora's Children, and the third book being Pandora's Promise. These books are still for sale at most retailers, booksellers, and so yeah. So if you want to pick up your own copy. Also, if you like this content, then make sure you like and subscribe and ring that bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me in any way, all the information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.